Have you ever noticed something that feels completely backward? Every time the world starts falling apart, every time the headlines scream about recession, war, banking collapses, or economic chaos, it sounds like the United States is in trouble. People talk about American decline, unsustainable debt, broken institutions, and a system that is supposedly on the edge of collapse. And yet, in those exact moments, something strange happens. The dollar goes up. Stocks crash. Companies fail. Governments panic. Ordinary people feel poorer. And while all of this is happening, money from all over the world rushes into one place. Not into gold, not into new currencies, not into alternatives that promise a better future. It runs straight into the US dollar. At first glance, this makes no sense. Why would the currency of a country with problems become stronger when those problems explode? Why would global investors trust the dollar more when America itself appears weaker? This looks irrational, almost insane, but it happens every single time. To understand why, you have to stop thinking about the dollar as a reward for good behavior. The dollar is not strong because the United States is perfect. It is strong because the global system needs it when things go wrong. In calm times, money looks brave. Investors talk about growth, innovation, emerging markets, and new financial orders. Capital spreads out, chasing higher returns. Risk feels acceptable. Optimism fills the air. But crises change everything. When fear enters the system, money stops asking how much it can earn and starts asking how it can survive. In moments of panic, capital does not want opportunity, it wants safety, liquidity, and certainty. And this is where the paradox begins. The safest place in a crisis is not the country with the smallest problems. It is the country that the system cannot afford to lose. Think of the global economy like a massive airplane carrying everyone on board. Some passengers sit comfortably in first class, others are squeezed in the back, but everyone shares the same flight. During smooth air, people complain about the service, the route, or the pilot. They argue about who should be in charge and where the plane should be heading. But the moment the plane hits severe turbulence, nobody cares about debates anymore. People grab the nearest seatbelt and pray it holds. The dollar is that seatbelt. In times of crisis, investors do not look for what is ideal. They look for what is unavoidable. The US dollar sits at the center of global trade, finance, debt, and reserves. It is woven so deeply into the system that removing it during a crisis would cause far more damage than holding on to it. This is not about trust in American politics or admiration for US leadership. It is about infrastructure. The largest financial markets in the world operate in dollars. The deepest bond markets are priced in dollars. Global contracts, loans, commodities, and insurance agreements are settled in dollars. When something breaks, the fastest way to close positions, move money, or stabilize losses is through the dollar system. Liquidity matters more than ideals when panic hits. During crises, investors need assets they can sell instantly without collapsing the price. They need markets that function even under stress. They need legal systems that enforce contracts when everything else feels uncertain. They need a central bank that can inject massive amounts of money without waiting for permission from anyone else. Only one system currently offers all of that at once. This is why crises do not weaken the dollar. They reinforce its role. Every major crisis becomes a test of survival for the global financial system. And each time the system leans more heavily on the same foundation, The dollar does not win because it is loved. It wins because there is no practical replacement in moments of fear. Ironically, American problems often strengthen this effect. When trouble hits the United States, the Federal Reserve steps in. Interest rates are adjusted. Emergency programs are launched. Liquidity floods the system. Trillions of dollars are created to prevent collapse. These dollars do not stay inside the country. They spread across the globe, stabilizing banks, corporations, and governments that depend on dollar funding. As the world absorbs these dollars, demand rises even further. Foreign companies need dollars to pay debts. Governments need dollars to support their currencies. Investors need dollars to protect portfolios. The worse the crisis becomes, the greater the hunger for dollar access. This creates a strange feedback loop. American instability triggers global demand for the very currency that instability is supposed to undermine. What looks like weakness becomes a source of strength. Crises also perform another function that few people talk about. They quietly eliminate alternatives. During stable periods, new ideas sound attractive. Regional currencies, parallel payment systems, and alternative reserve assets gain attention. People talk about diversification and independence. But crises expose fragility. Weaker currencies collapse. Smaller financial systems freeze. Experimental structures fail stress tests they were never designed to pass. Governments that promise stability suddenly impose controls, restrictions, or emergency measures. Meanwhile, the dollar system absorbs shock after shock. Each crisis leaves the world more centralized than before. Capital retreats from the edges and concentrates in the core. And the core remains dollar-based. This is why predictions of the dollar's collapse often miss the point. They assume the system behaves rationally under stress. It does not. It behaves defensively. In a crisis, nobody wants to be early. Nobody wants to experiment. Nobody wants to find out the hard way whether a new system really works. Fear favors familiarity. This does not mean the system is healthy. It means it is resilient in a very specific way. Crises act like filters, stripping away weak structures and reinforcing the ones already holding everything together. The dollar survives not because it solves the world's problems, but because it delays them. It provides temporary stability at the cost of long-term imbalance. And in moments of panic, temporary stability is all anyone is asking for. That is why every new crisis that is supposed to destroy the dollar ends up renewing its dominance instead. The system tightens around it, not out of loyalty, but out of necessity. And as long as fear spreads faster than alternatives can mature, the dollar will remain the place where the world hides, when everything else feels unsafe. This is not the end of the story. It is only the first layer of the paradox. To understand why this paradox keeps repeating, you have to look beyond headlines and into how fear actually moves through the financial system. Panic does not spread evenly. It moves through pressure points. And the dollar sits at the center of nearly all of them. Most global debts are not local. Corporations outside the United States borrow in dollars. Governments issue bonds in dollars. Banks hold liabilities denominated in dollars. This creates a hidden dependency that only becomes visible during stress. When markets are calm, this dependency feels manageable. When panic hits, it becomes urgent. Suddenly, everyone needs dollars at the same time. This is known as a dollar shortage, and it happens during almost every major crisis. It does not mean there are not enough dollars in existence, it means there are not enough dollars in the right hands at the right moment, under the right conditions. And when that happens, the price of dollars rises. That price is measured in power. During crises, foreign banks scramble to secure dollar funding. Companies rush to roll over dollar debts. Governments intervene to stabilize exchange rates. The demand explodes, and the dollar strengthens, even if the crisis began in the United States itself. This is deeply counterintuitive, but it reveals something crucial. The dollar is not just America's currency. It is the world's operating system. You can criticize it, you can resent it, you can plan to replace it, but you still have to use it while it exists. This system also benefits from memory. Every crisis leaves behind scars, lessons, and habits. Investors remember which assets failed them and which ones did not. Institutions remember where liquidity vanished and where it remained available. Over time, these memories shape behavior. The dollar has built a reputation not for preventing crises, but for surviving them. That reputation matters more than balance sheets during panic. When fear takes over, logic narrows. Decisions are made quickly, based on precedent rather than theory, and precedent favors the dollar. Another uncomfortable truth is that crises concentrate power. Small players disappear, weak institutions collapse, marginal currencies lose credibility. What remains is larger, more centralized, and harder to challenge. Each crisis reduces the number of alternatives. This is why the idea that a single dramatic event will suddenly end dollar dominance misunderstands how systems fail. Collapse is rarely cinematic. It is slow, uneven, and selective. The dollar system adapts by sacrificing parts of the global economy to protect the core. From the outside, this looks like resilience. From the inside, it feels like pressure being redistributed. The costs do not disappear, they move. Inflation does not vanish, it spreads. Debt does not resolve, it rolls forward. Risk does not die, it concentrates. And the dollar acts as the channel through which all of this flows. This is also why attempts to escape the dollar often strengthen it instead. When countries try to isolate themselves, they reduce trade flexibility. When they restrict capital flows, investors demand higher risk premiums. When they experiment with alternatives during unstable periods, capital retreats rather than follows. Fear punishes experimentation. Even rival powers understand this at some level. They may talk about diversification, sovereignty, and independence. They may build parallel systems. But in moments of crisis, they still prioritize access to dollar liquidity. Not because they want to, because they have to. This creates a psychological trap. The more the dollar is used during crises, the more indispensable it becomes. The more indispensable it becomes, the harder it is to replace. The harder it is to replace, the more people rely on it when things go wrong. It is a self-reinforcing loop, and it is not controlled by any single authority. The Federal Reserve does not command global trust. Markets grant it reluctantly. Investors do not love the dollar. They tolerate it. Governments do not worship it. They depend on it. This distinction matters. The dollar's strength is passive. It emerges from collective behavior under stress. It is not imposed through confidence. It is sustained through fear of alternatives. This is why American domestic problems do not automatically translate into global dollar weakness. In fact, they often trigger global reactions that favor the dollar even more. When uncertainty rises, the system tightens its grip on what it already knows. Stability in this context does not mean fairness. It means predictability. The dollar provides a predictable framework for chaos. It allows losses to be measured, debts to be serviced, and transactions to continue even when trust collapses elsewhere. That alone gives it power. But this power comes with a cost. Every crisis that strengthens the dollar also deepens global imbalance. Wealth concentrates, inequality grows, dependency increases. The system survives, but fewer people benefit from its survival. Over time, this creates tension. Not explosive tension, but chronic tension. The kind that builds quietly beneath the surface while the system appears functional. This is the hidden price of resilience. Crises do not reset the system, they reinforce it. And in doing so, they push unresolved problems further into the future. The dollar becomes stronger, but the foundation beneath it becomes more fragile. Not immediately, not visibly, but structurally. This is why understanding this paradox matters. Not because it predicts collapse tomorrow, but because it explains why the same patterns keep repeating. Panic, rescue, consolidation, and renewed dominance. Until something changes the way fear moves through the system, the dollar will continue to benefit from every shock. Not because it deserves to, but because the world has not yet built something it trusts more in moments of stress. And as long as crises arrive faster than alternatives mature, the paradox will remain intact. America stumbles, the world panics, and the dollar rises. There is another layer to this paradox that rarely gets discussed, because it is uncomfortable and difficult to explain in simple terms. Crises do not just strengthen the dollar financially, they strengthen it psychologically. When uncertainty spreads, people stop thinking long-term. They stop planning futures. They stop imagining alternatives. The brain shifts into survival mode. In that state, familiarity becomes safety, even if familiarity has flaws. The dollar benefits enormously from this instinct. Most people around the world have lived their entire lives with the dollar as the reference point. Prices are compared to it. Assets are measured against it. Success and failure are judged through it. Even people who dislike the United States still understand the dollar better than any alternative. In a crisis, understanding matters more than ideology. When fear takes over, investors do not want to learn something new. They want something they already know how to use. The dollar does not need to convince anyone, it simply needs to be available. And availability becomes power. This is why crises tend to lock behavior in place rather than disrupt it. People retreat into habits. Institutions fall back on established procedures. Risk managers follow old playbooks. The entire system becomes conservative, even when it claims to be reforming itself. The dollar sits at the center of these habits. Another reason crises strengthen the dollar is that they expose how interconnected the global system really is. Supply chains break, trade slows, credit tightens. Suddenly, everyone realizes how dependent they are on flows they never questioned before. Many of those flows are denominated in dollars: energy contracts, shipping insurance, commodity pricing, international lending. When these mechanisms are stressed, the need for coordination increases, and coordination requires a common language. In finance, that language is still the dollar. This coordination effect creates a silent hierarchy. Countries with direct access to dollar liquidity move faster. Those without it fall behind. Over time, this gap widens. Crisis response becomes unequal, not because of competence, but because of access. The dollar becomes the dividing line between those who can stabilize quickly and those who cannot. This reinforces a painful lesson that markets remember well. In a crisis, independence is expensive. Integration is survival. As a result, even governments that openly criticize the dollar system quietly prepare for it. They accumulate reserves. They negotiate swap lines. They design policies around dollar availability. Public rhetoric and private planning diverge. Crises reveal which one matters more. There is also a timing effect that strengthens the dollar during panic. When markets fall, asset values collapse faster than debt obligations. This forces borrowers to scramble for liquidity. Since many debts are denominated in dollars, demand spikes precisely when confidence is lowest. This mechanical pressure pushes the dollar higher, regardless of sentiment. It is not optimism that drives the dollar in crises. It is obligation. And obligations do not care about narratives. The deeper problem is that crises reward scale. Small systems cannot absorb shocks easily. Large systems can. The United States, for all its flaws, still operates the largest and most flexible financial machine in the world. During stress, that machine becomes indispensable. This does not mean it is fair. It means it is functional. Over time, repeated crises reshape behavior permanently. What begins as an emergency response becomes standard practice. Temporary measures become expectations. The system evolves around crisis management rather than prevention. The dollar thrives in this environment. It is not designed to prevent instability. It is designed to manage it. And as long as instability is frequent, that design remains valuable. This creates a troubling feedback loop. The system becomes better at surviving crises, but worse at avoiding them. Each shock reinforces the mechanisms that caused the previous one. Stability becomes a performance, not a condition. From the outside, it looks like strength. From the inside, it feels like exhaustion. Yet exhaustion does not break systems quickly. It erodes them slowly. And slow erosion is easy to ignore, especially when short-term survival keeps being rewarded. This is why the dollar continues to rise during moments when logic suggests it should fall. The system is not responding to health, it is responding to stress. Crises are not anomalies in the modern financial world. They are features, and the dollar has evolved to benefit from that reality. As long as fear drives decision-making faster than reform can take shape, the paradox will remain unresolved. The United States will struggle. Headlines will declare decline. And yet, when panic spreads, the world will still reach for the same solution. Not because it is perfect, not because it is just, but because in the moment, it feels like the only thing that works. And that is the quiet truth behind why crises keep making the dollar stronger.